Okay, we are here in the 1760s today, I think. I want to talk about imperial wars. I want to talk the British Empire's financial advantages and what it has to do with the coming of the American Revolution. And I want to talk about. So we talked previously about the financial revolution. I just want to go over some of those things. Uh, and again, thanks for the emojis. Let me just go back to the last few weeks to recap a little bit. 2 weeks ago, we talked about drugs and why Europe really needed the Americas, was hooked on the Americas to a certain extent because of these drugs that initially had come from the East and are increasingly being produced in the West with these sort of transplantations into the Caribbean colonies in particular. Primarily a source for soft drugs like coffee, sugar, rum, and cocoa. And the thing about that that's interesting in the European context is that the desire for these goods is only increasing as people get hooked on them, right? It's not for another 100 years or so that people really understand the chemistry of addiction. Maybe more than 200 years that people understand the chemistry of addiction, but that's part of what happens is that Europeans are addicted to these things that then become colonial commodities. And yeah, opium is interesting because there are actually a lot of drugs from the Americas that never make it over, right? So we could talk about mushrooms. We could talk about peyote. We could talk. There are a lot of other things that Native Americans are taking, but and opium and heroin are coming from the East as well. Although there's not a whole lot of demand for it in the 18th century. Weed, all right, also marijuana and hemp, which is being grown and so this. Why is that the case? And it's in general what's happening is that if drugs are similar to drugs that Europeans have been taking for a while, they're more likely to be attractive. So drugs like sugar, which is people have been taking sugar for a while, but also honey. Coffee is very much like tea that people are familiar with. Cocoa is a sweet drink. It's sweetened to make it attractive to people. Tobacco seems to be a mild stimulant. Coffee seems to, and so it's the mildness of those drugs that makes them attractive to European states that want people to get. They don't mind if people are addicted to them or don't really recognize that people are being addicted by them. But other drugs are a little bit more of a problem, and those drugs are barred by those European states. And there's certainly not a tremendous investment in the New World in trying to create drugs that are seen as potentially harmful. So this is a it's drugs, but not the drugs, not what we would think of as hard drugs. Now you could say that alcohol is actually much worse for you than weed, but as people understood it at the time, people were familiar with beer. It was 1,000 years old. For war capitalism, it's interesting because war capitalism is initially the person who coined the term was Sven Beckert, and he was talking about cotton, really. And so I've sort of extended it to talk about sugar and coffee and cocoa and these other drugs. But you're right. You could focus on just one drug like sugar. The term that was around before Sven Beckert used war capitalism was merchant capitalism, and I don't like that term that much because it calls to mind, the Venetians or the Hanseatic League or something like that. And this is not just merchant capitalism. This is capitalism with guns, right? Capitalism with ships and cannon and rifles and sort of intentionally breaking down other communities to sort of build up your own communities. And so I think that's why I like the term war capitalism. But yeah, you could pick a single commodity and really sort of tell the whole story through it. Okay. We also talked about financial revolution in after 1693. Right, capitalism with a little bit of spice, and how how the use of debt allows the British Empire to grow quickly, basically by drawing in investment in the empire. So people increasingly invest in the empire, and a new form of taxation, new forms of taxation, which pull more wealth out of the English state. So you have the Bank of England there on the right. You have Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. I keep calling them Mr. and Mrs. Roberts. It's Robert Andrews. But Mr. Andrews, who is able to borrow money from the Bank of England. He's able to lend money to other elites like the Prince of Wales. He lends $30,000 at very high interest to the Prince of Wales. He owns almost a dozen ships in the Atlantic trade. And so the English financial revolution is not just about the English state, it's also about how English merchants who are allied with the state, or English ship owners who are allied with the state, are able to kind of amass a tremendous amount of capital. Yeah, it starts at 11:10. Sorry, I got confused too, right? I had 11 o'clock the first couple of times, but it's 11:10. We started at 11:10. Okay. And then the use of that debt to drop people off, basically, in the New World. The title of today's lecture is British Empire's Financial Advantages, 1688 to the 1760s. We're talking mostly about the French and Indian War, though. Okay. So dumping off people, and I've got two graphs here, well, a graph and a table, and the dates don't exactly line up, but it's worth mentioning that that Europe, Britain is dumping a whole bunch of refugees into the New World. The German refugees, the redemptioners, as they're called, who are sold as indentured servants. Also, the Scots-Irish refugees, who are refugees from the kind of poverty in Northern Ireland. And then also enslaved Africans who are being brought over in large numbers. And if you look at the numbers here, the number of enslaved Africans is much larger. This is a little confusing because on the left is a port of Philadelphia, which doesn't include all. So that's probably the biggest port in the United States, bigger than New York, in the 1700s or the early 1700s. And on the right is Africans imported into the mainland U.S. But as you'll see, the numbers of Africans imported are actually quite a bit larger than the number of refugees that come from these wars. So in the 1600s, it's religious refugees. In the 1700s, it's refugees from wars of various kinds, or basically impoverished folks from Northern Ireland or from Germany, the Palatines. Okay, alongside this expansion, though, so this ability to dump a lot of people is part of the financial revolution that Britain is engaged in. Alongside this, we see Yankee, Quaker, and other merchants wedging their way into this empire through rum, in part, providing grain to the islands, taking sugar from the islands and turning it into rum, or molasses and turning it into rum, and taking that rum and then using it, going all the way across the Atlantic to Africa to buy enslaved people, and even smuggling goods of various sorts, creating their own currencies. This on the left here, the Rhode Island currency, which is illegal, but Rhode Island creates it anyways. Creating illegal factories, like this one this paper factory up here, which violated the Navigation Acts and was secretly built in Connecticut to take basically cotton goods and turn them into paper. So this financialization of the English Empire allows a rapid population growth, but especially, as I said before, among the southern colonies. So what does that mean for the tension between the British and the French in the 1700s? Around 1748, we have the colony of New France, which stretches from the northeast coast of North America all the way to New Orleans. Okay, so this is New France, and it extends in this kind of sliver up through Montreal and Quebec City, down through to Mississippi. And this has about 44,000 people. in it. And this is compared to hundreds of thousands of British folks. So we've got, 100,000 Africans brought in. We've got 40,000 or so Palatines and Scots-Irish brought in. We've got a population of something like 400,000 total in this period compared to 40,000 French folks. Now, this is the French view of the 18th century. This is a French map, but it's, of course, a little bit different from the map above here. This map here has contested region, which is basically Alabama, West Virginia, Tennessee, and these regions. And the French version of this is, this is all French up through here. And the British are wedged here on the edge. And there's also Hudson's Bay up here, which is turned over to a separate group of British merchants. How is it that, why that wedge? And it's important to understand that rivers are crucial here. The St. Lawrence River is the river of the New World in this period. It's a really important river. It's in rivers are the way people move around in the 18th century generally. It's much faster, much more efficient than traveling by roads, which basically don't exist in this period, or not very good ones. So the St. Lawrence River extends down here, and these aren't all connected at the time, but with relatively a little bit of portage, basically getting out and moving your canoe or unloading goods and then reloading them onto another ship, you can get all the way up through the edge of Lake Superior. So the St. Lawrence River, the fact that the French control the St. Lawrence River is important, and this is the watershed. So all the areas that empty into the St. Lawrence River, and this is crucial for their control. Now, so I showed you what the French view of this was. This is the native view of these things, right? And so for native people, basically both the French and the British are outsiders, and these are regions that are controlled by native people. So we've got the Miami and the Shawnee. We've got the Iroquois up here, and the Iroquois are actually extending. This is actually language groups and not exactly territory, but the Iroquois are extending into what's called Western Pennsylvania as well. So it's a very different map. Oh, sorry, I missed a couple of these things. Exams are going to be graded Tuesday late afternoon. So I'm going to review the grading, but it'll be Tuesday late afternoon or evening, and I've updated the packback grading. The state lines that we see today didn't exist, and these it's just to help you kind of see them. A map like this probably would not have existed at the time because there wasn't very good knowledge of where these rivers are. It's a somewhat fanciful representation. People were still looking for the Northwest Passage in this period, still thinking that there was some river somehow that connected the Atlantic to the Pacific. We know that wasn't the case, but people still thought as late as the 1760s and 1770s that there was some magical river that would be discovered that would allow people to get across here. Okay, this, on the other hand, is the governor of Virginia's view of, and what he's interested in is the Ohio River. And the Ohio River, let me go back up here, is controlled by the French primarily, as the French see it. As the British see it, that area, the Ohio area, is contested. Now, why do they contest it? It's an interesting question. The British claim, believe it or not, that they can defend the rights of native people against the French using the Treaty of Utrecht. So using this treaty between basically Britain and France, the British colonists say that it's their job to defend the Iroquois against the French. And so that's why this territory is debated. In fact, this is native territory, right? This is Miami territory. This is Iroquois territory, and Ottawa territory, and so the tension between these basically two empires and multiple native groups over this area is going to be the source of friction. So the St. Lawrence is the only way, as I said, to get to the Great Lakes. Americans want to break into this region, and they look at where the Monongahela River meets the Allegheny to form the Ohio River. Bear with me here for a second. Exactly. The British say that they're the only ones who can exploit the natives, not the French. Okay, so this is a picture I took when I was in Pittsburgh a while ago. One of my books was turned into a play, and I got invited to Pittsburgh, and I took this picture because I talk about this spot a lot. This is the Allegheny River, and this is the Monongahela River, and together they converge and form the Ohio River in what we now call Pittsburgh. And this Ohio River basin is incredibly valuable, right? The Ohio River is about 1,000 miles from this pinch point, which is now Pittsburgh, all the way to the Mississippi River. The valley that's in it is 204,000 square miles. It now has over 25 million people. So this is the Ohio Valley, and what we sometimes call the Old Northwest. And this is the area that British colonists, and particular Governor Dinwiddie, want to challenge the French for. And the place, as they see it, once you control this spot, this little spot up here, the place where the Allegheny and the Monongahela River meet to form the Ohio River, if you can control this place, you can control this whole river valley, right? Because controlling that single point means that you can prevent others from coming in. Now, rivers were how people moved. People did not use roads. People did not have railroads. People moved entirely by river. So if you were going to go and settle in a territory in, say, Western Pennsylvania or something like that, you built a raft, or you had someone build a raft for you. You put all sorts of your belongings in barrels and things like that, and you boarded the raft, and you got off at some port on the Ohio River and established yourself from there. And so that's where Cleveland and Indianapolis and Louisville and all these other cities are cities in large part because they were on this river, and the river was how people traveled. So this river is crucial to understanding this fight for settlement between the British and the French. So in the 1750s, land speculators in Virginia hoped to establish a fort that will allow control of this Ohio River Valley. And as you notice from that image, this is the area where go back here. This is the area where the British and the French are contesting this region. Okay. But by 1754, the French have already built a fort at that corner, at that edge, called Fort Duquesne. Sorry, that's the white font is not all that visible. But Fort Duquesne is the French fort that's established there. And as they see it, it's the center for their fort-based, river-based trading system with the Indians that's going to extend all the way to New Orleans. Right? Is that clear how this works? So you've got this Ohio River. The Ohio River starts up here in Pittsburgh, and it goes all the way here to Cairo, Illinois, where it connects to the Mississippi River. Right, and so it's this whole Ohio River Valley that's being potentially contested. Now, for the Iroquois Confederacy that's formed, so Fort Duquesne is at the edge of the Allegheny River and the Monongahela River, where they enter into the Ohio. So it's right at the eastern edge of the Ohio River. the entry point, really, to the Ohio River. Okay. Now, the Iroquois Confederacy was formed sometime between 1570 and 1600. And they see the English expansion as threatening, but they also are not a huge fan of the French. The five Iroquois nations call themselves the people of the Longhouse, and they were the Mohawk, you see here, the Mohawk, the Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. The Tuscarora joined in 1712, for those of you that are Tuscarora, and the Confederacy became known to the English as the Six Nations. And the Iroquois Confederacy is, on the one hand, concerned about all these English people all these people that England is dropping off into the New World. But they're also concerned that the French are in a position to break apart the Iroquois Confederacy. They see the French as potentially playing one part of the Confederacy off against another. And so they move in a little closer to the English, in part because they fear that the French are trying to weaken their Confederacy. On the other hand, if the French supply line is broken and the French are forced out of this region, they'll not be able to play off one European nation after another, off another. And so they try to remain neutral. In 1754, the British colonists meet with the Iroquois Confederacy and try to build, as they see it, the Iroquois worry that the French are helping the Miami and other parts of the Confederacy against the Iroquois. So that the French are arming the Miami against the Iroquois. That's the danger. So the Iroquois want to be neutral on this tension between the British and the French, but they're a little bit concerned about French arming of native folks that are further west. And so in 1754, the British colonists try to get together at the Albany Congress with the Iroquois to get them to unite against the French. And this is difficult because the colonies themselves are not all that interested necessarily in joining some warlike confederacy that's going to fight back the French. And sorry about my caption here. This is Benjamin Franklin's cartoon. And this image is later reused during the Revolution, but this is an image really from the Albany Congress, trying to get beyond treaty with the Mohawks and others in the Iroquois Confederacy, getting colonies to unite. But it basically fails. It doesn't especially work. Okay, so Dinwiddie sends out a Virginia militia to try to claim this area where Fort Duquesne is. Oh, sorry. I don't know what an FRQ is, but it doesn't sound good. Okay. So Dinwiddie convinces the British Board of Trade that English forts are being attacked. He sends a Virginia militia out, commanded by an inexperienced colonel, lieutenant colonel, only 22 years old, named George Washington. And Washington is trying to establish a beachhead for further western incursions. Washington's men are forced to retreat. They establish themselves are forced to retreat, and then Dinwiddie convinces the British Board of Trade that the English forts are being attacked. They send General Braddock from England in 1755, who commands a force with Washington as the officer of the volunteer forces. They get pinned down in a crudely built fort called Fort Necessity. That's Fort Necessity there, or a kind of modern rebuilding of Fort Necessity, but that's Fort Necessity. And they surrender after more than a third of their men are killed or wounded. And Washington's men start a war then between France and England that will spread to the Caribbean, to India, and Europe. Okay, so in Europe, this is called the 7 Years' War. In India, it's called the Great War for Empire. And in the U.S. now, where Americans call it the French and Indian War. As this war is developing, the Albany Congress tries to get the Iroquois on their side, and the Iroquois said, "The French are building forts. You all are, quote, like women, bare and open without fortifications." And so they kind of make fun of or ridicule the British in these regions. Unlike the previous European wars, though, this war, the French and Indian War, is going to have considerable British monetary support. They're going to be British regulars along with a colonial militia. The war starts badly. There are more French regulars who are better trained. And when they try to attack Fort Duquesne, and this is in the textbook also, the British basically array around here, around Fort Duquesne, and they try to attack. And the French troops hide behind trees. The British move up in formation under General Braddock. They're kind of mowed down. It's a terrible loss. They're forced to retreat. Washington is one of the few people survives. General Braddock himself is killed in the battle over Fort Duquesne. But after that loss, the British take this more seriously. The person who is crucial for basically making the French and Indian War a British victory is this guy, William Pitt, the Prime Minister from 1757. Pitt pledges that the war will be at His Majesty's expense. His larger global strategy is to pay the Prussian army, the Germans, to hold off France and Spain in Europe, and then use English soldiers in the New World to wipe out the French colony. They focus on the supply line, that long supply line down the St. Lawrence River to the Ohio, so that they want to cut it. So there are many skirmishes. Bear with me. In the French and Indian War. All of these. Along the Monongahela, along the Allegheny, and also on the Hudson River near the lakes. There are atrocities on both sides. In 1758, British officials finally promised the Iroquois Confederacy and Ohio Indians that the Crown will, quote, agree upon clear and fixed boundaries between our settlements and their hunting grounds, so that each party may know their own and be a mutual protection to each other of their respective possessions. And so, an important event that happens during this French and Indian War that goes from 1754 until 1761 is the Fort William Henry Massacre of 1757. And in this, the British are in Fort William Henry. The French accept the surrender of British troops, but the Indian allies kill the soldiers and civilians after they surrender. And this becomes the justification later for later attacks on Iroquois nations by basically American soldiers. By 1758, the British and the American forces eliminate French outposts in New York and prevent the resupply of their western ports, which means that many of the western forts, without getting supply on the Ohio River, are going to be defeated. The British put up Fort Pitt, which is again, so this was where Fort Duquesne was. It's basically broken down and replaced by Fort Pitt, and this becomes the British fort that will be defended in the French and Indian War. In 1759, British forces converge then for the final part of this battle on Quebec City. Oh, and so here's the conflict. So you have military maneuvers here in Nova Scotia, and then basically General Wolfe moving down the St. Lawrence River, trying to cut off the French. In 1759 is the Battle of Quebec. General Wolfe is sailing up and down the St. Lawrence, looking for a way into Quebec City, which has high and jagged cliffs and is very difficult to reach. He discovers, moving back and forth across the St. Lawrence River, a narrow path that he sees women drying laundry on the northern shore. And he sees the same laundry days later further down. He discovers that this laundry is being used to guard a narrow pass up to the Plains of Abraham, which are behind Quebec City. So he discovers that there's basically a secret path uphill that will allow the British to get onto the Plains of Abraham and get behind Quebec City to attack it. He brings a small corps back to the spot, has them climb uphill 180 feet, and then marches others back to the spot. By the next day, there are 4,000 troops stationed at the top on the Plains of Abraham. Quebec City is taken by 1760. This is commemorated in a famous painting by a British person who can draw faces, and that is the death of General Wolfe. Okay, and let's take a look at this image, and what I'd like us to do is read it. And when we read a painting, we read it from the top to bottom. We start at the right, at the top, we go to the left, and then we go down, and then left to right. That's how you read historical genre paintings in this period. So how does this? So this painting itself is supposed to tell the whole story of the invasion. So what do we see in this image? What's going on here? First of all, we should recognize that this is not, none of this is happening at the same time, that this is multiple events that are all thrown together in one picture. Okay, smoke and turmoil at the top. So you see the river here. This is the St. Lawrence River, and this is the sort of discovery of that spot. Right, excellent. So it's stormy at the beginning, and then it's clear at the end. And so at the beginning, there's and again, this is because we're this whole picture is a tableau that's taking place over multiple days. We see the British storming the heights of the Plains of Abraham. They get to the Plains of Abraham here, and then they're fighting. Okay, this is the victory on the left. Yeah, the chapel at the top left. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Sometimes the cursor is there and sometimes the cursor is not. But there's a chapel in the top left, and this is at the height of the battle. There's see the guy in the green jacket. The soldier's musket fire reaches the overconfident French, according to this image, and the hand from the messenger then relays this message. They run. Okay, and so this is what the guy in the green jacket is saying to General Wolfe. They run. This person is a ranger, okay, who represents that. So that green jacket represents a sort of American colonist. So somebody who's not in the regular British Army, and you see his dress there. Yeah, so we can zoom in a little bit here. Yeah, so this is people climbing up. So this is the British soldiers climbing up that hill and getting to the Plains of Abraham. This is the fighting that's going on. Over here is basically the redcoats on the left and the French on the right, finally being defeated here. And then we follow the line back, and we see the ranger pointing out that the French have been defeated. Oh, that's a good. The laundry. possibly there. I don't think General Wolfe is there's. I don't think you mean General Wolfe's. You're not talking about here. You're talking about the hand of the person on the right. I don't. Maybe I'm not seeing it. In any event, that's so. This is he's saying they run. And if you look at this outfit, this is supposed to represent an American, and this the person who draws this. I've now forgotten who did the Death of General Wolfe. Give me a second. It's embarrassing. The one Benjamin West, the one British painter who can paint, and I've forgotten his name. So this is Benjamin West, and Benjamin West had never been to this battle, and so everything is being described to him, and he draws it as he sees it, and so this is the. Sorry, but the faces here are pretty good. They don't look like thumbs, right? They are toes. They actually look like faces, but in any event, it demonstrates the heroism of the Navy alongside the Army, the assaults of the French on the left, the soldiers' musket fire reaches them, and on his lips, apparently in this, he's saying "they run," which is an important part of the battle when it's portrayed. But it's at that moment, or actually shortly after General Wolfe discovers that he's won, that he gets hit with musket fire and dies. That is some excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of gel there. Maybe it's the wind, but yeah, that's a lot of gel. So particularly interesting too is the Mohawk chief. Oh, so you've got the Mohawk chief here. Now, Indians didn't fight on the side of the British in this battle. So why there's a Mohawk chief there is a question. But Benjamin West didn't much know. He understood that the conditioner of the enemy. The Indians didn't fight on the side of the British, though they did fight with the British in Pennsylvania. And so I think the Mohawks did fight with the British against the French in Pennsylvania, and so I guess this is why there's a Mohawk here. Right. There's some. He's got some muscles. It was impossible that he would be there, but for the picture, it's important that he's shrunk below British might, and so he's the kind of smallest person in the character. He's very powerful, but physically, he's actually shorter than Mr. Hairgel over here on the left, and Wolfe's assistant, who also dies in the battle. There's a few other things to see here. There's a sort of a cross. Some people have said that there's a kind of cross image here with the line going up, and then a sort of, you can see in the flag a little bit, a line going on the right. And so this is the sort of martyrdom of Wolfe. This is very much like images of Christ in cathedrals at this time. Yeah, it looks like a priest. It's actually supposed to be an Anglican minister who's there. Okay. So, at the Plains of Abraham. Oh, it's a good question. Maybe this was not finished too. Maybe British people have a problem with not finishing paintings. Oops. I don't want to mess up the proportion. Wow. That's great. I have no idea. Could be a hat. Yeah, possibly. It's supposed to be something. Yeah, I honestly don't know. I should... So a few things about Benjamin West's painting here. First of all, many of these kind of historical paintings Benjamin West is the first one to sort of actually try to get the uniforms right. So there's a lot of attention to detail. But the fact that he used uniforms rather than classical imagery meant that the king didn't buy this painting that Benjamin West spent so much time producing. This the death of General Wolfe is really the climax of the French and Indian War, and it's a worldwide war which Britain wins in 1763, but at considerable cost. English national debt nearly doubles in the fighting of this war and the conclusion of this war. The cost of policing this huge region explodes. It's with the control of the St. Lawrence River and the Ohio River that basically allows Britain to basically dominate the eastern half of the United States. Oh, no worries. Tremendous debt burden is imposed for England, and Britain is given the choice of Guadeloupe and Martinique, or North America east of the Mississippi. Okay, so this is Martinique, and Guadeloupe. I don't know where Guadeloupe is. So these are tiny little islands, and Britain is given the choice, and it's at the last minute that Britain decides that it wants North America east of the Mississippi. The victory, really the battle is about the British war with France, but the thing that they really love, they really want, are these colonies, right? The colonies here are the ones that are the value-producing colonies. North America is just, 200 years in the future, it's going to be important as they see it. But for anyone's lifetime, it doesn't really matter as they see it. At the last minute, they decide to give up Guadeloupe and Martinique to the French, and instead take North America's holdings east of the Mississippi. This is very unpopular at home, right? Because you've got this expensive war that's been fought, that's doubled the English debt, in which British soldiers have died, and the holdings east of the Mississippi, as they see it, are valueless or almost valueless. So what began as a land speculation became a worldwide war. But could speculation in Western lands stop after British subjects now had justification for further land grabs? What the British impose is the Proclamation Line of 1763, which says no American settlers can move past a line near the Appalachian Mountains. And the end of the war laid the groundwork, though, for the collapse of the North American part of the British Empire. All right, I'd like to do a quiz